George R. R. Martin signaling the coming storm of his House of the Dragon criticism on his blog today. I do not look forward to other posts I need to write about everything that's gone wrong with House of the Dragon. But I need to do that. And I will. Not today, though. Today is... I don't know what this is. When we turn away from the gloom. And a bunch of different people have talked about it, right? George has been very public with his dislike about certain things in House of the Dragon. The first thing was, Sheep Stealer. The dragon. He said that it doesn't make sense. And I agree with him, right? He had like a very, very good quote in... And I will use this forever, by the way. I realized that might have been in the wrong scene. You might have not even seen what I was talking about. Whoops. But yeah, this is what he said. He had a very good quote about this. And I will use this quote forever. But basically what he said is like, every single fantasy world, it doesn't matter that it's a fantasy world. That doesn't mean you can forget the rules. And this is what I always say with The Walking Dead. The fact that it's fiction and the fact that it's a zombie apocalypse doesn't matter. You need to have internal logic in the series itself. It doesn't matter how goofy that logic is. It needs to have a consistent logic throughout. And when you break that consistent logic, nothing matters. It is unironically a slippery slope. Because if you've broken it once, well then what else can you bend? If you've established, like, let's say the typical magic system rule, you can only have one power. A dude appears with 2 powers. What happens next? How do you explain that away? Is it just one special dude? Is there more to it? You know? That is why I always talk about these magic systems and not like breaking them at a fundamental level. I talked about this with One Piece. I was gladly right. Or rather wrong. I wasn't right. I was wrong. When I talked about the 6 powers. Because when a series has a very strong internal logic, it creates suspense and it makes people curious. The best written series will usually have very, very hard magic systems because it allows people to discuss the rules and how to get around the rules. That is one of the greatest things about hard magic systems, because there is no way you can say maybe. There is a very simple answer because it is defined, right? And I want to hear what George has to say, because House of the Dragon, like the dragon thing is like one, right? That's like one thing that doesn't make sense with the dragons. Number 2, the travel times in the series make 0 sense. Like they're teleporting around again and it makes no sense. It is kind of unfortunate. I suspect he's also going to talk about writing, but I feel like me and George, in a weird way, are very much alike in that we get stuck up on these details, because I think fantasy worlds need to be immersive in the same way that the real world, again, has strict rules, basically. And as soon as you break that illusion, I guess the best way to say it is illusion. Every single series that I think has fallen off massively is because they broke the illusion. For example, let's do hard examples. Legend of Korra. It demystified the Avatar cycle. It removed most of the magic around spirits. It was not good. This is not even like a hot take. Everyone agrees Book 2 is bad. People say it for different reasons. I think the underlying reason for all of those things is because it demystified something that should have never been demystified, and it removed the magic around the entire cycle. It was a bad decision. It shouldn't have happened. I don't know what they were going to do with the sequel on that. I always meme about this, but why did the spirits go from like Wan Shi Tong, who's a menacing old god, to a freaking Minecraft glass pane? Why are they like transparent dudes with jagged teeth? Very spooky. Very spooky. Number 2, The Walking Dead. Everyone knew that characters had plot armor, but you didn't need to like indulge in that plot armor, right? As soon as you indulge in breaking the rules, people get annoyed because nothing matters anymore. Game of Thrones. Jon Snow was immune for everything because he was a good guy doing good things. You break the rules, the whole series falls apart. Because like in a lot of these series, the greatest thing is when you know you're in a corner and there is no way out. When you can write a scene where like the reader or viewer is desperately trying to cling on to hope, but they know it's over, that is when you've done it right. When you know you're staring like at a literal brick wall and you're never getting away and you're cooked, but you still say, but what if? But what if? And it doesn't happen. That is beautiful to me. And there are very few series where I've seen this done right. The Red Wedding is a good example of that. Ned Stark in season 1, good example of that. In a lot of those situations, desperately clung on to hope that this is not happening. There is no way, like no shot. Something must change. There must be like another variable that we don't know about. It must go somewhere else, but it doesn't. It never does, and that is so beautiful because you knew the rules of the world, you saw them play out step after step after step, and then they happened. And it doesn't matter what you think, what you hope, and what you believe. It happened. Now we deal with it, and we move on. Just like you do in the real world. Things happen, and you move on. You might not like them, but you move on. I'm so sad for George. Man's been questioning the legacy of his work in the latest interview. I think that's like I think the problems. A person made a very good video about this. I think the problem why this guy made a video calculating like when the Winds of Winter is going to come out, and he did like statistics and everything, and based on the statistics it puts it like 2035, right? I think the reason why George hasn't finished the book is because it's literally too complex and he feels like he's not going to deliver on it. I think it's literally that simple, because if you look at the number of POV characters, I think like because the thing with complexity is that it is exponential, right? It's not like you add one character and the complexity of the story increases by one character. It's not. Because the one character is now added to the world that is already, like, completely interconnected with all these moving parts. A single character can fundamentally shift the story in, like, a dozen different vectors, right? I think the same thing is happening with One Piece. Just putting it out there. I think Egghead was a good example of that. And I think, like, he has reached the point now where the complexity is increasing at such a tremendous rate that as soon as he makes one change, he feels like he needs to basically redo it. And I think he's stuck in a loop. And, like, that makes him question whether all of it was even worth it, and whether or not he could have, like, done things more clearly, and not set up these whole different things that spiral out of control. Because I don't think... People call him lazy. I don't think he's lazy at all. I think anyone who calls him lazy has never done anything creative in their lives. Doing something, like a creative endeavor is never a thing where you work harder and it gets done. That's not how things work. It's just not. And if it is, it's probably going to be mediocre or bad. I thought the Avatar cycle breaks. Well, the thing is, like, it doesn't even matter what the explanation for that is, because it fundamentally just demystified it. You know, and that's what I keep getting at. With a lot of these things, you can come up with explanations. You know? You can explain away all of these different things. But that is the problem. Because like, George is notorious for this. If you look at, like, Elden Ring lore, you can feel George in a lot of places. I think you can. People still say that, like, oh, it's hard to say where he is and where he isn't. I think there are certain spots where you can very much tell, like, all the old god stuff, all that stuff. That has the mark of George. The reason why I think it has the mark of George is because it is never explained. It is purposely ambiguous in the best way. Whenever you need to explain fundamental forces, you messed up. You should never explain fundamental forces. And I think something like Attack on Titan strayed a bit too close to explaining it. I think it was good, but it was a bit too close. There's a reason why it's a meme. Magic is magic, and magic is cool. Do not explain magic. Why is magic magic? I don't know. Why does gravity exist? It just does. It's one of the fundamental forces. It's just a thing. You can dive deeper into it, like why does like gravity, you know, accelerate things? Why is gravity denser, rather like stronger and denser things? You can explain a lot of different avenues around it, but what is gravity? Why does it exist? I don't know. It's just a fundamental force. It is what it is. It's just a thing. And that is how magic should be. It should be a fundamental thing with intrinsic rules, and that is it. No one should understand how it works by design. And that would be beautiful. And I think that's what the Avatar cycle should have been. There are cases where breaking the rules elevates the story, though my favorite example is The Longest Journey, where not even the protagonist has plot armor. Well, I think we're talking about two different kind of rules. Because I think, like, if you're saying that, like, the protagonist dies, you are talking about writing rules, right? Which I agree. Because, like, I usually think of writing rules as just tropes, right? So, plot armor, kind of a trope. Breaking plot armor, very good. Can be very, very good, you know? Not always. I think there are characters who you should give plot armor just because, like, that's how the story works. But breaking rules that people expect is good. What I'm talking about is breaking the, like, underlying logic of the series. I use rules, but it's not really rules. It's like the consistent vision, I guess you could say. Like, the vision of the series. In The Walking Dead's case, that was like, no one is safe, by design. And the comic book always acknowledged this. No one was safe. No matter what, no one was safe, and you knew that. The TV show broke that, like a dozen times over. And not only did they break it, they leaned into it. I know the video is just for goofs. I know. But I think it like illustrates my point pretty well, you know? Because I think like the 2035 figure is obviously a joke, but I think there is validity in how he comes to that figure. Because I watched bits and pieces of it. Another good example is Guts in Berserk, you know? I am 99% sure that Guts is still alive. I haven't finished Berserk, but I am ready to bet that Guts is still alive, right? But everything around Guts is constantly on fire. It is miserable, and Guts is punished. You can have plot armor while still damaging your main character. You can punish your main character so much while still having like impenetrable plot armor. And I think One Piece, Marineford, good example of that. Because like in One Piece, the main cast has plot armor thicker than anything. It's just like, it's not even armor, it's like, it's a force field. But Marineford still like hits you like a truck. And even more so everything that comes afterwards, right? And that's what I mean. Plot armor is not like just a thing where your character doesn't die. It's more so a thematic thing that you can use. And that goes back to the rules of the world. Because if you have created a world like Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire, where there is no even thematic plot armor, like people do just die, then this whole thematic plot armor is also kind of a thing you should consider, because should you do it? The worst part about this is that I think this is not something like you can quantify. It's a vibe. And that's the worst thing about it. Because people know when a vibe has been broken, but they can never tell when a vibe has been broken. People somehow know. And eventually, like in retrospect, everyone's gonna tell you exactly where it happened. With The Walking Dead, that was Negan's arc, because everyone had infinite ammo, people kept spawning. That is when the series lost its complete weight and complete grit. And it felt weightless. Everything in the series felt completely weightless. Right? You can say that it happened in Season 5, Episode 1. Right? That's like even further back. But Season 7 is where everyone agrees. Because it was just weightless and it dragged out for too long. Right? With Game of Thrones, people are like putting specific scenes basically where everything fell apart, yada yada. You can do this with every series. But you can never actually tell when you're in the moment that it's already too late. I think it's like an intangible thing that people know, but they never actually know until it's already too late. Unfortunately, most of my favorite series have fallen prey to this. Very few haven't. Very few. Even later installments of Avatar have done this. One day, we'll get like an animated Game of Thrones and an animated The Walking Dead, and we are gonna be so back. I'm gonna look like George. I'm gonna look like George, like this right here, right? And that's when the animated The Walking Dead and animated A Song of Ice and Fire series is gonna come out. And it's gonna be completely faithful to the source material. Completely. And by that time, we're also gonna have like an AI version. Like George is gonna like upload his brain, and he's gonna be like a weird pseudo AI, neural floating brain thing, right? And he's just gonna like completely control the entire series. It's gonna be made by just George. And the same with Robert Kirkman, right? That's where we're headed. It's gonna take a while, but we're gonna see it. All right, let's talk about this. Tomlin, on developing the upcoming Game of Thrones spin-off, Aegon's Conquest. Now, we stop right there. Aegon's Conquest is probably like my most anticipated Game of Thrones show ever. It's gonna be so good. They need to expand it, though. Because, like, maybe I've missed, like, a lore book, but I'm pretty sure, like, in the lore, the stuff we know of Aegon's Conquest is him literally flying around and just, like, burning everything and being a Giga Chad. He doesn't... There's, like, very little complexity. He's just, like, flying around and... Well, there's a reason why it's called Conquest. He's just going around and conquering literally everything. It starts with George R.R. Martin's work, or rather, what is done. I've now gotten to spend quite a bit of time with him, going through Fire and Blood, highlighting passages and asking him, what did this mean? What is this? What I think it is, sometimes really grilling him. True. It's really taking that text and treating it like it's real history. Remember what I said about an internal logic of a series? What a based man. My approach to it was that Fire and Blood is written like a real history and these things happen, but we don't know everything. Also, there's that great quote, history is written by the people who won. So then there's that as well. For me, it's about making sure that I respect George and I respect the text. And then also, it has to still be a dramatic story. Those characters have to go on a journey, they have to change, they have to go from the beginning to a middle and to an end. I think this is going to be the biggest challenge with this. Because I think, like I said, I think Aegon's story, like based on at least what I know, I've read Fire and Blood and I've read bits and pieces of like the history book, but I think the history book is basically the same thing as Fire and Blood, from what I understand. It was like the world of Westeros or something. It's basically the same thing, I think. Like his character doesn't really have a lot of depth, you know? So it's going to be interesting to see what they do. But this for me is always, I talked about this with Craig Mazin and The Last of Us and Matt Owens in One Piece. When you hear about, we're not telling a story, we're not going to make it epic, we're not going to sell you this big thing, but it's when I respect George and I respect the text. So many people in Hollywood tend to forget that the reason why you currently have a job is the source material, that it's good to see this. A lot of people, when adapting things, they forget that the reason why they're adapting anything is because there was someone so smart that they made a thing that deserved an adaptation, that gave them a job. People forget that. It's good to remember that. So when I see people talking about actually respecting the material, like we've seen with Matt Owens, like we've seen with Craig Mazin, and constantly like greenlighting everything, that's when I'm like, yes. That's exactly what they said about respecting George, so. True. But I don't know. Hearing it is at least a good sign, you know? And to be fair, I'm gonna put up my finger here and start doing a Charlie. To be fair, that was true with season 1. That was so true that George said the show's Viserys is better than his Viserys. The first season of the show was damn near immaculate. It was perfect. It was beautiful. And then season 2 was kind of like, ooh. And I think season 2 was an outcome of season 1 being so good. Is the typical thing of people getting like, people think that they made it even though it wasn't their story. I think it's a vibe check. I think it's like a vibe check. And they think that their vibe is better than George's vibe. Hollywood, I respect. What is that? It's not 100% true. It's not. Because people like Craig Mazin, right? With the whole Chernobyl show and The Last of Us, it is all about respect. You know, they respect the material. And I think that's very, very good. Because, like, for me, it is always, for me, it's never about, like, being 100% by what was already written. It's more so about understanding why it was the way it is and replicating why it is the way it is, right? Like, not what it is, but why it is. Because you don't necessarily... just a dumb example, right? Like, a dude has green hair. Does it matter? Not really. But what if that green hair is indicative of, like, his upbringing or something? Something like that, right? Like, something that adds depth. Then yes, it is important. You know? You can look over, like, surface level details, but you need to understand why they're there. I wish more people had the humility of just, like, acknowledging that it's not their thing. I made a whole video about it, so I'm not gonna go, like, on a whole rant again. Like, on the main channel, I made a whole video about this. The reason why anime is so successful is because Japan, as a culture, is much more respectful toward other people's work. Right? So they have the humility to say, this is not mine. I have been brought on as a tool to express this in another form. That is where my part ends. I am bringing this story to life. That is it. So they will take things from the manga, adapt them page for page. And that is beautiful. I love it. And purely from an economic point of view, it also makes more sense. Because, like, people are going to read the manga and then they're going to, like, watch the show, right? And it's a value chain. It's very beautiful. Right here. This video did very, very bad. But it's a very good video that talks about all these points. The cornerstone for all of that is just knowing the material and respecting it. But yeah, I'm excited for the stuff they're going to cook up. One day we're also going to get Winds of Winter, of course.